Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we are going to be talking about designing for success, key considerations for youth sports facilities. I'm Ashley Whittaker. I'm going to intro us and outro us and make sure you guys have a great experience. Thank you so much for joining us. We have two incredible speakers with us today. We have Jim Arnold and Jake Whittaker of SFC, of the Sports Facilities Company. So we've got experts on today's call that have been leading projects, over 70 projects across the U.S. To bring their expertise to you today. Couple of housekeeping items. Please submit your question and answer at any time throughout today's broadcast. We will be looking through them. If you have any technical questions, we'll be answering those along the way. And then at the end, we're going to leave 10 or 15 minutes and we'll be answering those questions live. So please, anytime you can submit those questions. There is no live speaking or chat, so anything that you need, you can throw into that webinar chat, and we've got tech support, or we can answer along the way. And then also, in case you miss one of those important details and you want to go back, don't worry about that. We're going to send you a recording that's going to be provided in your email after today's broadcast. It should be in there 24 to 48 hours afterwards. One new thing for today's webinar is we have polls going on. There should be one open right now. So if you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are, the project you're thinking about, we have one now and one at Q&A. We would love to have you guys tell us a little bit about you, and we'll be updating our content along the way, trying to help make sure that we tailor it to specifically your needs. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim Arnold and Jake Whittaker to take us away.
Wonderful. Jake, you want to intro yourself real quick, and then I'll run with it?
Great. My name is Jake Whittaker. So I'm our Senior Vice President of Development Support Services here at the Sports Facility Companies. I've been on board of SFC for about 6.5 years, and I've had the opportunity to, work on dozens of facilities that are in the SF network, helping them through the design and construction processes.
Awesome. And my name is Jim Arnold. I'm a partner here with Sports Facilities Companies, and I oversee all of our business development efforts around the country. So helping clients get from vision all the way through reality. So today, we always like to start really quickly. For those of you who aren't familiar with Sports Facilities Companies, just a little bit about who we are. We are going into our 24th year or 23rd year. And since day one, we have had the singular mission of improving the health and economic vitality of the communities that we serve. And our approach to doing that, and our vision as a company, is to manage the largest and highest performing network of sports facilities in the country. And so today, while the facilities we manage over 94 venues around the country, and those range from aquatic facilities, indoor, outdoor, park and recreation, all the way up through arenas and stadiums. Today, we are going to talk to you about indoor sports facilities and some of the design considerations that go into these facilities, as well as some of the trends we're starting to see as these facilities really take the lead on a lot of not only impact generating activity and quality of life enhancements, but also now what we're seeing is mixed use retail and development throughout communities. So we're going to start from the outside in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the site and how the site impacts design and how you enter a building, the experience we want guests to have from kind of first impressions as well as access. We're going to talk about how we make tough decisions in program-led design and allowing the lead programs and the tenants drive how we're laying facilities out. And then once we get people in the door, we're going to talk about guest experience, what design implications are having on the ability to drive revenue, create efficient operations, and also showcase your communities, your brand, and your partners along the way. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jake and allow him to talk a little bit about the site and entrances.
For all of our projects, we're starting from the outside in, and we are not civil engineers, we are not architects, but we have the operator's hat on. And leading in the planning process, and then helping support through the development, and then operating. We live with these facilities. So when we start looking at the elements of the site, we know that these elements are going to impact your site. So they're not to be ignored. So from, hey, how is traffic entering from the roadways? How are they entering the site? What are the stormwater considerations, where maybe we have some wetter areas and need to plan for some stormwater? where there might be some easements and areas to work around through what's the topography and what are the challenges that those things are going to create, as well as what some of those opportunities that it may come as well. In addition to what's on the site, we also have to consider, hey, what's going on around it? So especially as sports and youth and amateur sports facilities are becoming more of the anchor of mixed use developments, it's important to understand what other activities are around, what retail, what hotels, how are people flowing through, not just into the site itself, but into the region around it, and how are all those elements working together and impacting each other. So I want to look at an example to start off here. You can kind of see here is how a building is laying out on a site. And you can kind of see a before and after as the design evolved. And there's several elements here. So as we're thinking about the site, one of them is what is the back of house? You know, every facility has a front and a back, and it's something to really consider. So where are we doing the loading? Where are we taking out trash? Where are we doing those type of activities is a really important element. As well as, you know, in some facilities, you may have multiple entrances, and the goals of the design of the parking may be to get the parking as close to the facility as possible. However, with a lot of programs, it's really important that people are coming to one entrance. They're having the one experience, and maybe there's a credentials and a ticketing window and check. And so you can see on the left-hand side where there was the kind of the before and the parking was very close to the building. However, it created an arrival experience of people having to walk all the way around the outside, and weren't necessarily getting the greatest experience of what the back of the building, the side of the building. So in the after, you can see how reorganizing it allowed for a great entry experience right into where we want to be. We want people to enter, which also helps reduce staffing as an operational consideration. So there's also a lot of elements too that this design enhanced as far as F&B and layout and viewing potentials. But one example about how the right site and layout on the overall site is really important for the design of a sports facility. So another example that we're going to look at is Morristown Landing. Now in this example, it's much more focused on local programming and a lot of different programs that they're hoping to run, that they do run in this facility, more than an event center. So everybody still enters through a main entrance, and it really acts as a hub to a lot of the different programmed areas. In the next slide, you'll see that there's areas for courts, there's areas for aquatics, there's areas for community center, and community programming, and all of those elements, you get that one entry point with a great experience, with a great theme and branding, and a person to meet you there and to help you figure out, hey, what programs are you going to? Where do you need to interact with the facility? And it really acts as that hub for all of those elements. At the same time, a big goal of Morristown was also membership driving. If a goal of your facility is memberships, it's really important that members have their own area and have their own amenities and have a reason to want to become a part of that membership organization. So in this example, the whole upstairs on the left-hand side is the membership area. So you have access to different levels of fitness. Oftentimes it's locker rooms and running tracks, and the elements that are driving memberships are really important that it's laid out in a way that they have their own member areas and aren't necessarily, they have access to the other programmed areas, but they're not necessarily mixing.
Yeah, and as you think of that, you know, going back to Morristown just for a second, as you think about that, Jake made one comment early in that, which was, you know, the ability to greet people. And when you think about memberships and you think about community, which is what this facility was about, there is something to someone coming in and being recognized. You know, these are people who live in the community, know each other. And so there's that touch that's one, really, really important. And I think it's important anywhere, but it's also doable in a membership scenario where people are kind of coming in either one by one or in smaller groups. As we start to look at venues, and so this is Legends Event Center in Bryan, Texas, and this was very much, while local use is certainly a part of this facility, this was very much developed to drive tournaments, events, large-scale economic impact generation. And so this is a very different entry experience. So when we start to talk about laying this out, what you'll see is, and what we really like about this layout is, once you walk through the doors, you're immediately immersed in the environment. And so one thing we see in maybe some older buildings is you might walk into a lobby and then there's a whole nother set of doors to get into the event space. Versus here, you walk in and you're immediately seeing out upon the court. This site allowed us to actually drop the courts down. So you kind of walk in on a little bit of a promenade that overlooks the courts, but you're immediately hearing the sounds. You're hearing the shoe squeaks. You're hearing the basketballs or the volleyballs. And so as soon as you arrive, you're kind of wowed. The other things we start looking at here too is it's a very large, wide entrance. And so we always tell people never underestimate the amount of space teams take up when they all enter together. And when a bunch of people get in one spot, if it starts getting crowded and the wayfinding isn't done right, you're immediately starting to create frustration with your guests. So creating a large, wide, open area, you're immersed in the experience, but you're also, if you look to your left, you see an opportunity in where your food and beverage is coming. You see that food and beverage experience here. If you look over to the right side, that's where our family entertainment and arcade is. So not only are you seeing what you're participating in the event, but you're also immediately getting kind of introduced to your different opportunities to have different experiences while you're within the building. And then there is this. So this is Rocky Mount Event Center, and in reality, there's buildings that need to do both of these things in a lot of communities. There are some communities who build these for singular purposes or very driven purposes. There's others who need them to be a little bit of everything. So Rocky Mount's a really good example. And when we start looking at these buildings that need to be community gathering spaces, event centers, but also sports, here we do concerts and everything in between. One thing we always kind of stress is, hey, let's start looking at different entrances and different entrance experiences. And kind of the low-hanging fruit example we give here in Rocky Mount, we do a ton of weddings, a ton of high-end events, catered events. We have a catering kitchen here. And so one side of the building, we actually kind of separated still within the building, but completely separate entrances, even how you arrive to the building. And the reason is if you just think about it, when a bride's walking in, just after going through the ceremony, getting married, excited to go with all her friends and family into her wedding reception, last thing you want her doing is walking in the same doors as a bunch of sweaty teenagers who are there for a basketball tournament. It's just not the experience. So we're thinking about how people arrive, and then that kind of parlays into the rest of the facility. How does sound travel? How do people access food, restrooms, et cetera, to be able to keep the separation, but then also merge those when an event calls for it.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about how the overall facilities, can be programmed in some different membership and events, and how they can act as one large facility and sometimes multiple facilities. And so we believe in a program-led design and really understand the programs that are being led. And we don't have time to cover every space here today, but we are going to focus on the spaces that are programmed the heaviest. So that's normally on an indoor facility, the courts and the turf areas. So there's several things that we look at. One is hey, what are the goals? What types, or what are we trying to drive? Is it economic impact? Is it local use? Is it financial performance? And what are the programs that we're going to run that are going to generate those outcomes? When we start talking about the programs, there's different elements. There's one, the sports. What is the demand for the different sports, and what are we hoping to achieve? So from basketball, volleyball, but there's also a lot of sports and activities that you don't see the court lines for. So cheerleading and wrestling and pickleball and a lot of other sports that can happen in a large space, as well as, if the turf programming, it's the soccer, lacrosse, flag football, understanding what programs are going to be run so we can get the right layouts for those. In addition to just what sports, it's what's level of play. Are we doing, younger kids? Are we running AAU? Are we running high school? Are we running, what organizations are we actually running at what levels? Because that's also going to dictate a lot of the different elements in the layouts as well as what non-sporting events. What about music events and trade shows and local communities? Those are also really important elements that are going to affect the overall design. From requirements like electrical to MEP to ceiling heights, all of those things are going to be driven by what those programs that we're wanting to run are going to be required, and it's going to make those the highest performing programs. So some of the other factors that we're also looking at is, what are the multi-use facilities? Not only are we going to run multi-uses, but are we going to run them at the same time? That's going to really dictate, hey, do we need multiple entrances into the overall court space? So you can see on that bottom picture, an example of running a wrestling event at the same time that there's basketball programming happening. With the right design, those type of opportunities can happen, and can be really successful. And so when we talk about access, it's, hey, how are we walking into the program spaces, maybe not right onto the courts? How are we positioning doorways between the active areas, between the volleyball court lines, between the basketball court lines to get that overall best experience? While why are we also considering things like access control? And if we're renting to a events right holders, how do we make sure that they have the ability to staff and check wristbands and maybe run two events that have two different pays, all at the same time? We're also talking about glazing and light levels. So glare is a big thing if you're having a natural wood court. So consider, what is the light? We love natural light in these spaces, but also sometimes it can be challenging for some programming. If the programming, we don't need as much light control, then maybe we can allow more daylight as long as we control the glare. But also, what is the equipment and ceiling heights? And over the core areas, how are we doing ceiling suspended and retractable equipment to allow for all of those programs to be successful? So on all those elements, we don't have time to dive into the equipment and the access and all of the different parts and pieces that go into these program spaces. But one we did want to spend a little more time on today was kind of the surfacing. We get a lot of questions about what different types of surfaces and what the options are, and how to achieve all of the programming goals that a facility is aiming for. So one of the questions we often get in a court type of facility is the synthetic versus the hardwood court. And which one's right. And so again, we go back to the programs. You're talking about a hardwood court. There's maintenance considerations. You can play higher level basketball, but other sports like volleyball will play either hardwood or synthetic. So it's really important to understand what level of basketball you might be playing and having the demand for in events, as well as the other sports. The hardwood can be covered with floor coverings, as an example, in order to run non-sporting events. But we are going to also have to have additional storage for those if that's the solution we have. Or a synthetic floor, you may be able to do the non-sporting events right on top of that floor without additional floor covering. Then there's the opportunities for actually transitioning the surface. So we have some facilities that actually put turf on top of courts. Sometimes that's for some weeks, sometimes that's for single events. So that's an opportunity where we can get multi-surfaces, as well as things like wrestling or floor coverings that can come in and can actually cover certain courts to allow additional programming options and to open up additional revenue streams for the facilities. So there are storage and operational impacts, and it's really important. That's where the planning process is extremely important to understand. What are the programs? How are we going to schedule them? Are we going to run them both at the same time? And how can we find the right surface solutions that fit those programming needs?
Yeah, and Jake, we get this question a lot. If you'll maybe dive in just a touch on it, courts and turf, which goes first, which is easier to lay over which, what order do those go in, or what have we seen experience with?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it does depend on the programming. So we have facilities in which we have turf that we put hardwood courts on top of for large events and for large weekends where we need to expand the court inventory. We also have a facility like that's shown on the image here that you're putting turf on top of courts. There are some trade-offs as far as the actual play that can happen on each one of those surfaces depending on the level. And if you're needed a full-size turf, or if you need a full-size courts and what level you're playing each of those sports on. So the answer is it does depend on what your programming and scheduling is. Another option of surface transitions is actually more seasonal. So in some cases, it makes sense to do something like transition an entire ice rink, like at the Champion Center or the Woodman Center is doing right now, into seasonally different programming. So whether that's seasonally into different courts or seasonally into conference spaces, there is an option of using seasonal demands in order to do larger transitions to allow the spaces to function differently in certain seasons and certain months of the year.
And so kind of transitioning a little bit. So now we've talked about, getting into buildings once you're in, talking about the programming, making the right decisions around what's ultimately driving the events we're hosting. But once we start to get people into the building, it is vitally important that the design from the beginning and the development of the building sets the operations up in a place where they can deliver an incredible guest experience. I think it goes without saying, that's going to keep people coming back. in an industry right now that has more competition than ever and more venues coming online faster than we've probably ever seen before. It's these type of decisions and understanding of how spaces work that separate the top venues from others, and the reason why event right holders choose one venue versus another. And so some of the things we're starting to see, you know, these are stressful weekends. So ease of access, seamless logistics, coming in and being able to quickly understand where you are, where to go, where your court is. So kind of in this upper image, you're seeing some nice signage up top, so it's up and visible. This is actually a video board. This is a YO Sports Ranch. This is a video board. So when you walk in during the day, it's giving you the information, everything you need to start your day. But then this is also updating throughout the day. It's giving opportunities to update schedules, scores, when your next game is going to be. It's creating opportunities for guests to share images on their social media, potentially creating contests or scavenger hunts. It almost creates kind of an interactive opportunity throughout the day. And then also towards the end, it's an opportunity, kind of, we talk about these Instagrammable moments and how people are tagging. That's where in this venue, we set up the champions and the award ceremonies so that the event owner has their logo up there, facility has their logo, and then the teams are able to take those pictures as well. So a really nice, it's actually two-sided. So you can kind of throughout the day see and kind of come back to this area to figure out what's next. So that's part of that interactive. Along with that, you know, the interactive experiences, we're talking a little bit about family entertainment, arcades, food and beverage opportunities, unique and creative and local custom food and beverage and retail is important. Giving people access to things they don't see in other venues, pop-up stores, event right holders able to create maybe limited run merchandise and things that people aren't seeing in other locations. One of the other things that we want to look at too is how are spectators being able to view the game? If every single game they're just sitting on the same set of bleachers and looking at the same court setup as they do every single weekend, the players may have a great experience, but they all start to blend together. And so we start to figure out, like, is there opportunities for what maybe it's club level or VIP spaces or lounges or condition spaces. Maybe it's some raised platforms that you can watch a basketball game like we showed at Legends before, where you could watch the basketball game from the floor, or you could actually get a little bit of an up top perspective as well. And from those spaces, we're also seeing the need to allow them to kind of interact with each other. So you can kind of see in this image that you flow right from some of the food and beverage areas into the courts and into the different programming spaces, but you can easily separate yourself. So you never get closed off from the event, but you can pull yourself out of the loudness, the game. If you just went in and got walloped as a team and you got beat, it allow, you know, spaces that allow you to separate yourself from it, but still be immersed in the overall event experience. And so we're starting to see larger, more wide open lobbies where food and beverage blends into gathering spaces, which blends into court spaces or programming spots. And then ultimately, what we're looking at is two additional things. One is making sure we're getting community involved. I think for a long time, these buildings had community spaces or community days, which was public and local use, and then it got shut down for economic impact. The newest buildings and the venues that are being successful right now are finding opportunities, whether it's through food and beverage or family entertainment opportunities, to allow the building to always be open to your community. And so the more people from your community that come, interact with the people from out of town, there's more people on site, there's more buzz, there's more experience. It just has a better feel to it. And then last is, you know, accessibility beyond just ADA. So, you know, we're looking at sensory rooms, we're looking at nursing spaces, you know, we're looking at toddler zones, you know, places that can allow these families are here for full days and sometimes full weekends and full weeks. And so creating spaces that allow people to kind of be comfortable regardless of what their abilities are or anything along those lines. We're starting to look at all of those different spaces in these venues. And then, you know, we think about customer service and guest experience, and I think most of us immediately go to mom, dad, brother, sister, grandma, grandpa, the people who are coming for the events. But realistically, one of your most important guest experiences is your event right holders, the groups who are bringing the tournaments that are then in turn bringing the guests. And so as we start to look at these spaces, we're talking, and Jake will talk a little bit in operating efficiencies about load in, load out. How quickly can they get in and out? How easy is it in terms of, do they have to staff up incredibly to unload all their stuff, or does it make it easy to come in and out? What are different opportunities for them to drive revenue? Are there spaces that are actually built-in pop-up shops for their retail rather than just setting up a 10 by 10 tent in the corner? So that's going to drive that activation. Are we making, especially when we start getting into cheer and dance and gymnastics, are we making the lighting and the load in for lighting and technology and audio? Are we making that as efficient as possible? Are we creating those spaces for awards and for login or check-in and those items that make the guests have a great time and want to come back to that event? And then also making sure we've got spaces available for those tournament directors and event right holders to be separated. So that they have kind of a back of house area of their own that's private, that not even the operators of the building are messing with, but allows them to run a smooth, efficient event for not only themselves, but their officials and everybody else involved in the game day. So if you do all of these simple things right, it adds that next part of the conversation is, Jake talked goals a little while ago, and a lot of times goals bundle down to economic impact, community access, and then some level of financial performance. And financial performance isn't always the number one factor, but in some form or fashion, it's always going to weigh into the development of a building and the operations of a building. And so as we start to look at, do we get the program right? And if we get the program right and we deliver an incredible experience, we're going to set our operations, we're going to set the building up in an area where they can actually be successful in driving revenue and financial performance. And as we start thinking of that, a lot of the things on this list you're going to see are things that I just mentioned in guest experience. And the reason for that is revenue is not about how many times you can get somebody to take their wallet out of their pocket. If you do that, or if you're looking at that, or just looking at, hey, people can purchase food here and retail there, you're actually going to end up hurting yourself. You're going to hurt the experience, and you're not going to drive the revenue or per caps you expect. What we're focused on when we're looking at the design of a facility is what spaces are being put in that can actually create experiential purchasing. And so we talked a little bit about the pop-up, making people feel exclusive when they buy things that might be at your event or your venue. We're looking at family entertainment, ways for people to step away from the event, or when they're done with the event, stay at the building. So golf simulators, bowling, arcades, anything, and those are the spaces that are also driving in, the people from your community as well. So the family entertainment piece. We're also looking, in terms of actual space development, is who are your tenants? Who are your partners? So we're seeing, especially on the indoor side, medical sector being a massive partner in terms of naming rights, but also looking for space within your venue. So actually sports medicine space, rehab space, sports performance, and that bleeds out into not just the space they use, but the athletic facilities as well. We're starting to see implementation of hospitality and VIP experiences. So teams actually paying. So instead of having to lug their bags around in and out of it for 2, 3, 4, 7 days, they can actually buy a space. And that becomes kind of a VIP clubhouse space for them that they can have food delivered to. They can keep their stuff in. They have TVs, they have climate control, they have all those things. And then the last one we'll kind of touch on a little bit is, I would say on a project by project basis, the food and beverage experience is dynamically changing. And it has gone from concession stands to full service concession to catering to kind of bar hospitality, full restaurants. And now we're starting to have conversations and look around, some of the things that a lot of us have probably seen in airports or other areas of, opportunities to go into markets where you just walk in and walk out. So getting product and food and drink in people's hands quicker, easier, so they can go back and spend time, whether it's at the games or whether it's family entertainment or the other areas that they're spending dollars. And so happy to answer, obviously, at the end, any questions here, as we know it's major item, but I'm going to turn it back over to Jake, because as we talk about financial performance, it's not just on the revenue side of the chart of accounts.
So one of the things that we look a lot at the design is, hey, how does it fit into the operations side of it? So how do the SOPs of the day-to-day work with the overall design? So some of those, include cash handling. So some venues are cashless. Doesn't mean that we actually have to not consider it, because then you have reverse ATMs as an example of how you may have to implement something along those lines. If you are taking cash, then hey, how are we doing security? How are drop safes? Things along those lines. A big one is also the staffing requirements. Do we have multiple entrances and ways that people are entering the building, and do we need, and how do we lay out the areas so that way we can be really efficient with the staffing requirements of both the facility as well as somebody who might be running programs, whether it's a local program or an event program. How do we make sure that that can be done in a really efficient way from a manpower standpoint? As well as transitions. When we talk about surfacing, things along those lines, the staffing requirements of turning over a facility, matters as well. The back of house, how are we doing trash handling and maintenance? So how are we making sure that from the food and beverage that it generates a lot of trash, that we're not walking that trash out in front of a spectator and hindering that guest experience? How do we make sure that we have easy access to, take that trash out? On the ticketing and box office design, this is an area that is very changing over the last decade. And some events right holders may no longer want any ticketing at all. Sometimes they may want some level to interact with a guest that's outside. Part of that's climate driven. So if you're in a cold environment, you probably want to spend a little more time on getting people inside. Sometimes in nicer environments, it's okay to have some setup for events outside for that credential check and save a little bit of square footage on room. Or can we create a design that allows the best of both worlds, where somebody can actually interact with staff as they come in, but also might be able to interact with a staff or with a guest from the outside before they enter into the building? Storage is always a function, a question is, how do we have efficient storage as well as allowing for events to load in and load out very quickly and efficiently? Do we need a loading dock? How does that flow? What's the traffic around it? And then, food, beverage, concession, catering, all of those operational programs, making sure that they're laid out to be very, very efficient. Sometimes that means transferring some food or areas to another grab and go. Sometimes that means multiple food and beverage locations. A lot of that depends on the size and the programs that are being ran inside the facility. And of course, safety and security is always a big consideration when we're thinking about the operations of the sports facility. How do we make sure all of the guests are safe and that we have good security and good design that allows for that? So a good example and to talk through is Wintrust Sports Complex, and this is in Bedford Park, Illinois. It also has that great lobby entry experience where you immediately have kind of the guests and the credential areas. But right away, you also notice that you have a lot of ability to interact with a lot of the program elements. So the courts are easily accessible, but so is that in that green area as a family entertainment and an amenity to make the events even better. And straight ahead into that red is your food and beverage. But operationally, it's also really efficient that you have a back of house and your back of your food and beverage where you can get deliveries, take out trash, do the loading, and do a lot of the back of house activities is really conveniently located in a way that doesn't interfere with the overall guest experience. So as we go into kind of a deeper dive case study, I want to send a quick reminder out to put in your questions. There's a question and answers button at the bottom of your Zoom. And after the case study here, we will be jumping into some questions and answers. So make sure that you get your questions in.
So Jake, we'll go through. So from here, we're going to kind of take a walk through one case study, Advent Health Sports Park at Blue Hawk, which is in Overland Park, Kansas. And I think what we'll do here for everybody is we just kind of walk through like, hey, here are the things we're thinking about. And this is one of the newest venues in the industry as well as in the SF network. And I think it's a really good look at how all of these are being implemented. Some of them we've already talked about throughout the process, but I think maybe putting them all together into one venue and one design process will be maybe a really good way to close us out and then go into that Q&A. Yeah, so here, so in admin, Jake, do you want to lead kind of the overview of the floor plan, and then we'll jump into arrival experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at this facility, there's a lot of different program areas, which is great because it's driving significant traffic in a lot of different ways and areas. One is you can kind of see that 11 and 12 there at the bottom and 3 at the top. That's the court space. It also can transition to some turf space. So it's got that 8 basketball, 16 volleyball courts, which you can run both local programming as well as some of the larger national events in order for it to be the destination. We have an NHL sized ice rink. Actually, in phase 2, there's additional one as well. And we have sports performance, which is an additional program that's really great, adds additional revenue, drives additional traffic. And meanwhile, you have number 10, 9, 5, and upstairs. Those elements are amenities and an overall destination as well from a family entertainment center experience. So bowling alley, laser tag, it has a zip line roll glider. It has an upstairs bar and overall amenity space. It has an esports lounge, arcade. So all of those elements are giving additional opportunities to enhance what the overall program and events that the facility can run.
Yeah, and as you think about how these venues sit within, and we mentioned a little bit earlier, and I think we did a webinar maybe a month or so ago about mixed use development and these facilities acting as anchors. Part of the reason in these developing venues that those areas are so important is in order for some of these venues to act as the anchor, they have to drive activation Monday through Sunday. And so those are the spaces that drive local use, drive local residents, bring brothers and sisters to come along during hockey practice or basketball practice, but they also enhance the typical Friday, Saturday, Sunday tournament use. So by merging those two spaces together, that's what's really starting to drive the hotel development, the retail development, restaurants, et cetera. So you saw this a little bit earlier. You can kind of see the venue kind of sits in the back here, and then drives the rest of the mixed use around the entire development. And so as we kind of take you back through the different stages we talked about, the entry experience and how people interact and enter the building is one of the first things we talked about. And so here there was actually a really kind of a focus on getting people almost in the right mindset from the get-go. So rather than just walking up on concrete and entering the building, you can see kind of a little play area. This is any given day you're out there, whether it's during a tournament or whether it's before or after, you're seeing kids throwing footballs, kicking soccer balls, running around. Over here is actually kind of it's just a turf space, but it's up and down and there's little slides built in. And again, you're seeing this is kind of pretty normal. Like every time we walk out here, every time we visit the facility, regardless of time of day, regardless of whether it's an event or not, there's just kids running and jumping and playing. And it almost kind of creates a little bit of sense of wonder or relaxation or creativity before you enter the doors. And so you're kind of getting a mindset there. And once you enter, the picture on the upper left is kind of as you look to your right. So the doors are right here in the middle of the building. You can see into the ice arena on your way in. And then when you enter the building, you can still see in. And so we want to make sure everybody can see what they're about to experience upon entrance to the building. And then right above, there's a sky coaster, sky rail, which is kind of a ride as part of the family entertainment center and arcade. So you may walk through this door and somebody might zoom right above you. And so immediately you're kind of big open, but you're seeing where you're going to play. You're seeing the arcade, you're seeing the food and beverage. You're kind of getting a little bit, again, immersed. I don't want to say overwhelmed, but maybe a little bit overwhelmed, but in a good way. You're starting to get stimulated in all sorts of different ways. So Jake, so that's kind of that entry experience and kind of getting people prepped and ready. Jake, you want to talk a little bit about just kind of the programming space? So that's the arrival. Now we're getting into how we made decisions around programming and laid it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are elements that are driving not only revenue and experiences, but also driving that traffic, right? And the goal is a lot of flexibility. So we gave some examples of that where, you can put in and we can run turf programming as well as court programming. You can also see here where, there's the seating ability. So you can do a larger event that's seated with a single game type of experience. Or you can see on the left-hand side, more of the multi-court and multi-tournament type of experience. So because it's so flexibly designed, there's power requirements, so trade shows and other non-sporting events can be ran. as well as all sorts of levels of different types of sports. So from state wrestling tournaments to cheer and dance competitions, all of that is designed into the flexibility of those program spaces. And additionally, spaces like ice and sports performance that are driving additional program opportunities to drive different traffic that has a lot of cross marketing platforms as well. Where when you come maybe for ice, maybe you find yourself back and participating in an adult volleyball league, as well.
And a good overlap here too is when we start talking about vendors or partners and tenants and spaces you're developing, is this all started to come together. So the photo here on the lower left is actually in Blue Hawk. We partner with TPH, Total Pro Hockey. And so, this building has spaces in it for classrooms. And so the TPH is kind of an academy for hockey. So there's academics, there's training, and then the association there helps drive additional hockey programming and kind of legitimacy for the venue across the hockey landscape. And so you kind of start to see from a scheduling perspective how these spaces are laid out to not only serve potential membership, potential tournaments, but also trying to find those core anchor tenants who are there 7 days a week throughout the entire year. And the last piece, we talked about guest experience, driving revenue. And, this venue, we've mentioned it a couple times. This is probably on the cutting edge in terms of the focus on entertainment, the focus on experiential family entertainment. There are bowling alleys. There's multiple bar and restaurant locations within this venue. There are golf simulators and golf simulators as well as game simulators throughout. We mentioned the Sky Rail. There is a massive arcade, and then there's kind of there's a large laser tag venue, and then also some really kind of unique private areas with different games you can play kind of in a full service bar kind of entertainment space. And so the vision here and the goal here is any given day of the week, you've got people from the community who are here for practices. You got every different sport imaginable is in this building practicing, from basketball and volleyball to hockey and lacrosse, cheer, dance. And so you have them, but you also have the siblings there because there's things for the siblings and the mom and dad to do. And then you've got kids from around the country coming in for TPH and academic programming. And then you're layering on top of that the weekend traffic. And in some cases during the summer, the week-long traffic of the visitation. And all these things are put in a way that from the moment you even walk up to the building, you're starting to get immersed in the experience. Then once you get in, you're just engaged. And there's so many different opportunities to be engaged. And the layout and the wayfinding and the communication developed as part of not only the design of the building, but the design of the operations is done in a way where you're educated before you walk in the building and then reinforced once you're inside the doors. And so from an overall perspective, we know not every venue is going to be this size or have this amount of amenities, but it still goes back to kind of the core of what makes a successful design is when the arrival is where the first experience, the arrival is done right. You're catering to the right programming. You're looking at that, your major tenants, you're making sure they're taken care of. And then we're getting creative around spaces from there. And then you're creating an incredible guest experience. And that guest experience is going to drive the revenue to do better and cooler things. And then as you start to get better, you also want to make sure, Jake mentioned it and talked a lot about it, is that behind the building, everybody gets to see the flashy stuff. And we want to make sure that behind the building, from storage square footage to correct number of restrooms to how you enter and exit, unload, load, that the bones of the building are creating operational efficiencies that, again, drive that bottom line that then allows us to do better things for guests, better things for the community, and drive more programming and potentially expansion of facilities. And so I think, Jake, don't want to end without giving you a quick opportunity to add anything that we think you might have missed, and then maybe open it up if there's any questions in the panel box here, or Ashley, turn it back over to you.
Jake, any parting thoughts before we run into some Q&A?
No, I even into the Q&A, we can see some questions, regarding the planning process, and of any project, similar to this, that's a key element of it is understanding what are the demands, what are the sports, what's going to drive, those goals. And in this case, it's traffic, it's out of town traffic based on the funding mechanisms, things along those lines. But a lot of the questions really come back a lot of times to that overall planning process, getting it right, in order to understand those programs so that you can design, the optimal space for them.
So let's start there, and we'll make this a two-part question because there are two questions. And so the first half of the question, Jim, can you just take our audience through a little bit of the planning process? We've got a question on how do we establish demand? And then after you answer that, let's send it to Jake and talk about how do we take those numbers and translate that into a floor plan?
No, that's great. And I'll try to make this quick because I did see Kaz put in a great question as well that I think is really pertinent. We're getting a lot. So from a planning perspective, we're regardless of when we come into a project, even if schematic designs are in process, we say, hey, we want to make sure we're looking at the market. So we always suggest taking on a feasibility study to some level, whether it's unpacking it all the way back to the beginning, or whether it's just quickly looking at a program-driven business plan study. We want to analyze the market. We want to understand what exists in the market, look at the demand, the number of people playing the sports. We don't want to just do the click button demographics. We suggest really getting into the weeds and talking to all of the event organizers. You need to analyze what events are being run in regional facilities and find those event right holders and talk to them. What needs do they have? What expansion do they want? Then you're starting to peel it back down to your local level. And so you're really working hard to get that gap analysis, understand who your competitors are, understand realistically what your drive time is for the markets you have and the infrastructure inside your market. And then kind of put those numbers together into an annual operating schedule. And looking at market rates, market demand, and then the gaps, as well as the competition, you can start to develop what your best opportunity is or what your multiple opportunities are and start to analyze the pros and cons of each of those.
And that's really the basis of, when we start talking about what those spaces individually need to do and how they all need to work together, that planning process is what lays that groundwork. So, a lot of these facilities have multiple demands, for multiple sports and a lot of people wanting to do a lot of different things, but it's really which ones are going to achieve the overall goal. Maybe there is a high demand for, basketball, but it's a well-served market. And maybe there's great local uses and great local spots, but maybe there's not a large event spot and you want to drive large event type of traffic. So a lot of it comes back to that overall pro forma. We talked a lot about those programming spaces. It comes to things like food and beverage as well. Like at what element of the planning, and when we look at food and beverage revenues and experiences, do we need a walk-in and do we need a hood and do we need those type of elements in order to let those numbers and that planning drive the design decisions?
Yeah, and I'll add one quick thing in there too, Jake, 'cause that's a great point. The pro forma you build in the planning process, you want that to be a working document. You don't want a study to be something that says, yes, it works, and you toss it up on a shelf and now let's go design. Because I don't think, Jake, unless you're aware of one, I'm not, I don't think we've been in a project yet that hasn't had to value engineer something. And you have to make decisions around what to take out or what to include. And what our recommendation always is make sure that pro forma and that business plan can quickly edit. And so that not only we're not just making decisions on, hey, we could either lose a hood or lose 2 golf simulators. It saves the same amount of money. But what we want to do is we want to actually understand long-term, what are the ramifications of the hood versus maybe a simulator or something like that. So having a pro forma that can be quickly adjusted and adapted to help make educated long-term decisions is how ultimately you're going to get into the best program for your venue.
100%. So we talked a little bit about now planning, how that goes into design. You guys have started to talk about costs a little bit. We're getting a lot of several questions about that. Not necessarily project specific, but not all of these cost $100 million to develop. So can you guys give us maybe some ranges or stats on what does it take today in 2025? What does it take today-ish to put together one of these facilities? What are we looking at in terms of development cost?
Yeah, and so the costs are going to be driven from the goals. You do have to hit a certain size if you want to be a national event, type of destination. But if you're looking for community programming and you're looking for those programming spaces, then the investment does not need to be nearly as big. You might be closer to the 5, 10, $15 million range, depending on the number of courts and the number of turf or the programs that you want to be able to serve and serve well. But a lot of that will also depend on the demand of the area. And what is the current competition, and what is the current demand for the number of teams in a league or in a community program that might be able to need to be served.
Okay. And a few of the other questions that kind of lead into that are about ROI or partnerships or impact to the community. And Blue Hawk's a great example of a mixed use development anchored by sports. Can you guys talk a little bit about the partners who invest in projects like this and maybe some of the reasons why they do that from a city, county, or real estate development perspective?
Yeah, I can take lead, Jake, and hit cleanup for anything I miss. What we're seeing is, in long story short, this is something that's really kind of grown up quickly coming out of COVID. There was a lot of businesses and different entities that act as anchors for mixed use development, event centers, hotels, big box retail, didn't necessarily bounce back as quickly as a lot of other things. And so, going way back, coming out of the recession in 08, but now coming out of COVID, these sports venues and every venue within our network, when we reopened it, it had the most successful 1 year period. I guess each one had the most successful 12-month period as soon as they opened coming back out of COVID. And we haven't slowed down since. And so the public side took notice during the recession coming out that sports never really took a downward turn. So they said, hey, we're going to invest in sports. And I think coming out of COVID, we started to see developers take notice. And now you had the developers and the public side both focused in on sports and youth sports tourism, saying, hey, wait a minute, this is working through both of these situations. And so then we started getting the question of, rather than build it and it will come development, now developers and public entities are saying, hey, how do we do this all at the same time? And how do we master plan these together? And so I think that's probably been the biggest shift, is now these venues are creating public good, enhancing quality of life, offering recreation opportunities for local residents. And that's what the public side's getting from a community standpoint. But then they're filling the stores and the shops and the restaurants and the hotels Monday through Friday for local, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday for all of these events. And now developers are saying, hey, wait a minute. Now we're getting week-long traffic, year-round traffic. So it's driving their development and their cost per square foot that they can get for these pieces. And then in turn, driving the impact and the property tax that's going back for the betterment of the community. And so, really long-winded answer there, but we're just seeing this start to be really a perfect marriage for these type of anchors, because they're not just talking about dollars and cents. They're anchors that are driving that, which it has to do. But then on top of it, it's layering in the quality of life amenity add for the residents who live around those developments.
Great answer. The way you measure success, you can cut that pie many different ways. And talk about it in that way. I'm going to ask you guys a couple quick fire questions because we have some tactical ones. We've talked about some big topics, so some quick fire, more tactical ones. We've got a question, synthetic flooring versus wood flooring. Do you have to pick one? What are the pros and cons? Quick answer.
You don't have to pick one. You can roll out synthetic over hardwood, but most of the time you are picking one. Hardwood tends to be the true basketball, highest level basketball leagues and events it's a differentiator to have wood. And that's what those events right holders are kind of looking for in that specific basketball. But it really depends on if that's your focus or not. At the lower end basketball and a lot of other sports, basketball is the only Olympic sport in which hardwood is the official surface. But it still drives a lot of sports and sports decisions here in the US.
All right. How about parking? Surface parking versus parking structures. What do we see in that capacity that's required?
Yeah, depends on your market, but it really takes a special project, I would say, in order to see a structured parking work, or some level of public incentives or other things in order to get that density of parking and the ROI on that sort of complex. We do have a few of them across the country where structured parking fits in, but it is seldom. Usually these are going in areas that there's more land available. and surface parking is probably the norm.
All right. A couple more quick fire ones here. We didn't talk about laundry facilities in any of these, and so we're getting a question about that. Do you need to have on-site laundry? Why or why not?
Yeah, I would say there's two programs that will drive the laundry need. One is if you're doing more catered and table events that might have linens. So if that's part of the vision, Rocky Mount that Jim talked about was a wedding, that would drive laundry. Memberships, if you're hitting a certain level of membership focus, you're probably also offering some level of laundry service. The majority of the other type of venues might have residential type of laundry just so they don't have to go out, but usually there's services that can cover those facilities' laundry needs.
All right, I got another one for you here. How about strategies for spectators? So you guys talked a lot about this in terms of guest experience, making sure that, there's an arrival experience. Obviously, people are coming to see the games if it's a sports tourism experience. So how do we know when to do a championship seating versus modular seating, tip and roll bleachers, that sort of thing? How do you make that choice?
Yeah, I would say that choice is going to come down to understanding, are we doing the same programming and the same type of setups, consistently enough that we can get away with something that's more fixed. Normally the experience for basketball and volleyball, depending on the layout, oftentimes they run perpendicular to each other, and you need the flexible seating options in order to be able to be as configurable as possible. Cheer, wrestling, those type of events, if you're having fixed type of seatings and seating in one's areas, you're going to be limited on the experience that you can create. At the same time, flexible seating oftentimes is less comfortable. Usually it doesn't have seat backs. There are some solutions though that can hit both, but they do take up additional floor space. So it's something that you have to consider in the planning process.
All right, I'm going to throw this question to Jim.
I was getting away with it there.
I know, I know. So, because you kicked my butt in pickleball last week, here's a pickleball question for you. What are the trends we're seeing around pickleball courts? And I'm going to expand on that and talk about entertainment a little bit and where does that intersect with youth and amateur sports and recreation centers?
Yeah, and that's you kind of gave me a cheat code too, because you kind of answered the question there. On pickleball facilities. There is a high demand. I think probably everybody who's on this call probably is seeing in their community a high demand for it. The interesting thing about pickleball is if we just design courts or just say, hey, we've got basketball courts or synthetic flooring and we've got courts laid out here, people will come use them, but there's very little revenue associated. It becomes kind of almost like a community good. If you're looking at this in terms of an ROI or a business model, the real value comes from this being a sport that's driven by social experience. And so finding, creating leagues, creating programmings, but putting in spaces around the courts for food and beverage, for gathering spaces for people before and after games. Same idea too, creating viewing platforms, creating areas where people like to watch other people play pickleball. So, if they're all just laid out in a wood floor and it's all on one level, once you're done playing, you're probably leaving or you're walking and sitting down somewhere. And so when we start laying out courts, especially if we have a pickleball focus or a specific facility catered to it, we want to try to get as many opportunities for people to watch in the same areas where they have the opportunity to grab food and drink.
Excellent. Okay, we are 2 minutes to time, so I'm going to wrap us up here. And I want to let everybody know, first of all, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our awesome speakers, Jim Arnold and Jake Whittaker. We have 46 questions that we didn't get to answer. And so here's what we're going to do. We are going to answer those in a Q&A format, and we're going to post them on our website and send the link to that out with the recording. So we don't want you to miss the fact that you asked a question and it didn't get answered today. We're going to post that on our website, and we'll make sure you have these guys' contact information as well. So if you have additional questions or want to schedule a call, you have access to our team and our experts here at the sports facilities companies. So again, thank you so much for joining us today, for your great participation and your questions. Please be on the lookout for that recording, email, and again, a link to this site where we will answer all of your Q&A. Again, thank you to Jim and Jake, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.